The U.S. has drawn a line in the Caribbean, and Venezuela just crossed it. Tonight, American destroyers are steaming south, armed with Tomahawks, Marines, and orders to choke Nicolás Maduro's narco-state. The message from Washington is clear. This time, there's no going back. For years, Washington tolerated the chaos spilling out of Caracas. Shipments of cocaine, fentanyl, and other poisons carved deadly paths through Mexico, across the Caribbean, and straight into American cities. Thousands of families were torn apart, communities hollowed out, and law enforcement agencies begged Washington for backup. Now, backup has arrived, but it's not police. It's not the DEA. It's the U.S. Navy. President Donald Trump authorized the deployment after a tense meeting with his national security team. The decision wasn't sudden. It was years in the making. Maduro's history with Washington is soaked in mistrust. Back in 2020, he was indicted on narco-terrorism charges, accused of conspiring with Colombian FARC rebels to pump tons of cocaine into the United States. That indictment marked a point of no return. Since then, the U.S. has steadily escalated pressure, first offering $15 million for information leading to Maduro's arrest. Later, the bounty doubled to $25 million, placing him on the same level as terrorists like Osama bin Laden. And this summer, Washington shocked the world by doubling it again, $50 million for the Venezuelan leader's capture. Attorney General Pam Bondi didn't mince words.
And more. Yet Maduro's reign of terror continues. He is one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security. Therefore, we've doubled his reward to $50 million. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes.
Her warning wasn't hollow. She revealed that more than $700 million in assets tied to Maduro's allies had already been seized, along with mountains of cocaine directly linked to his criminal networks. But bounties and seizures weren't enough. The White House wanted something visible, something that would send a message far beyond courtrooms and asset freezes. It wanted a show of force. 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson, now spearhead the Armada. These warships are the backbone of the U.S. Navy, engineered to dominate in the air, at sea, and deep inland. Each carries Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking Venezuelan soil from hundreds of miles away. Each is outfitted with the Aegis combat system, able to track swarms of aircraft and missiles simultaneously. And each is designed to survive punishment, with radar jammers, infrared decoys, and reinforced steel hulls. Beneath the waves lurks an American attack submarine. Its movements are invisible, its strike potential deadly. Above, P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft sweep the skies, tracking every ripple of sea traffic. And riding alongside this fleet are 4,000 Marines and sailors, prepared for operations that go far beyond mere symbolism. This is not a drill. This is not posturing. This is America positioning a strike force at Venezuela's front door. At the White House, spokesperson Caroline Leavitt put it bluntly.
He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel.
Anonymous U.S. officials confirmed to Reuters and CNN that this deployment isn't short-term. The mission could last months, with constant patrols across Caribbean waters and international airspace around Venezuela. From this point forward, every move Maduro makes will be under American eyes, every smuggling route pressed under American pressure. And so the question now is simple. Does Washington intend to merely intimidate or to strike? Washington doesn't send thousands of sailors and Marines just to cruise in circles. Every movement is calibrated. One option is to keep the fleet just off Venezuela's coast, a floating threat designed to rattle Maduro's inner circle. Sometimes, the very sight of U.S. destroyers on the horizon is enough to trigger panic inside a regime already drowning in unrest. Another option is to turn the Caribbean into what Pentagon insiders call an American lake. With Poseidon aircraft conducting relentless surveillance and destroyers patrolling smuggling lanes, traffickers would be suffocated long before their shipments ever reach U.S. shores. If Washington wanted to go further, it could escalate into full-scale maritime interdiction. That would mean American warships stopping and searching vessels at sea, drones scanning the waters from above, and Marines boarding traffickers red-handed. A full blockade, though, carries far greater risk. Under international law, such a move is considered an act of war. Still, even a so-called quarantine could grind Maduro's fragile economy to a halt, cutting off cartel profits and choking the flow of weapons into the country. Then comes the most extreme path: direct strikes. With Tomahawks loaded aboard Arleigh Burke destroyers, the U.S. could erase smuggling depots, airfields, or cartel hideouts in a matter of minutes. Precision strikes would cripple trafficking networks, while Marines deployed ashore would send a signal that the confrontation is no longer covert pressure, but an all-out regime showdown. The Pentagon insists no option is off the table. Earlier this year, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reminded reporters that reference was deliberate. The United States officially designated Venezuela's Tren de Aragua cartel a foreign terrorist organization earlier this year, putting it in the same category as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And in August, reports surfaced of a classified Pentagon directive signed by President Trump himself. The order authorized military force against selected South American cartels, effectively green-lighting operations both at sea and on foreign soil. Few details of that directive have been released, but insiders confirm that U.S. combat planners are already mapping out scenarios for Venezuelan targets. From drone reconnaissance flights to Navy SEAL raids, the spectrum of possibilities is wide. Maduro, meanwhile, knows his military cannot match America's firepower, yet he continues to play the David versus Goliath card. On national television, he vowed to mobilize 4.5 million militiamen across Venezuela, but experts doubt the number. Independent counts suggest that in reality, barely 343,000 existed in 2020, many of them elderly, poorly trained, and armed with little more than outdated rifles. By contrast, the United States fields the most powerful military force on Earth. Its destroyers are shielded by Aegis radar. Its aircraft carriers project air wings across continents. Its Marines are among the most battle-tested fighters in the world. Global firepower rankings place Venezuela down at 50th, behind countries like Denmark and Chile, while the U.S. sits firmly at number 1. It is a mismatch so glaring that Maduro's rhetoric sounds less like defiance and more like desperation. Still, the regime tries to rally its base. Maduro claims that the empire wants to trample Venezuela's sovereignty, while his foreign minister, Ivan Gil, insists that Washington's narco-trafficking charges are nothing more than a cover for imperial aggression. In a sign of growing paranoia, the government even announced a temporary ban on drones flying in Venezuelan airspace, a defensive move that shows just how nervous Caracas has become. But propaganda and posturing cannot hide the reality offshore. An American strike group is waiting, and Venezuela has no equal response. While Washington escalates, it is not standing alone. Across Latin America, multiple governments refuse to recognize Nicolás Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate president. Both his 2018 and 2024 elections were branded as shams by regional observers, further eroding any claims of legitimacy. Canada, the European Union, and much of the Western world have aligned with Washington's position. The Organization of American States has gone as far as accusing Maduro's government of crimes against humanity, while the International Criminal Court has opened investigations of its own. Venezuela is no longer just facing sanctions. It is staring down near total diplomatic isolation. With few allies left, Maduro has turned his gaze east. China remains one of the only major powers still willing to maintain ties. At a recent rally, he proudly displayed a Huawei smartphone, a gift he claimed was from Xi Jinping himself. It was a not-so-subtle attempt to signal Beijing's support. But Beijing is cautious. Its foreign ministry has issued statements condemning foreign interference and calling on all sides to respect Venezuela's sovereignty. Yet words are cheap. And military guarantees are another matter. China exports billions in goods to Venezuela every year while importing very little in return. That imbalance works in Beijing's favor, giving it leverage over Caracas. Chinese firms have invested heavily in Venezuela's oil industry. One private company even pledged over $1 billion to develop 2 major oil fields, with the goal of producing 60,000 barrels a day by 2026. But this is not charity. It is business. And while those investments keep Maduro's regime afloat, they do not equal protection. Analysts widely doubt Beijing would risk a direct clash with Washington over Caracas. In other words, Xi may send phones, loans, and trade deals, but he is unlikely to send fleets or troops. For Maduro, that means Chinese help may cushion his economy, but it will not shield him if Tomahawks ever begin to fly. What about Moscow? Once a vocal backer of Caracas, Russia has grown noticeably quieter this time. Its attention and resources are consumed by its ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, leaving little bandwidth to openly confront Washington in the Caribbean. Without reliable Russian military backing, Maduro finds himself even more cornered. On camera, Maduro thunders about sovereignty and resistance, but off-camera, insiders say he is frantic. He knows that one decisive U.S. strike could decapitate his regime overnight. Like many embattled dictators before him, he leans on bluster to project strength. But the contrast is glaring. America's warships are real, visible, and heavily armed. Maduro's so-called militias are mostly fantasy. Ordinary Venezuelans see that contrast too. Exiles speaking with American media say many citizens are quietly hopeful that U.S. pressure might finally end their suffering. Neighboring nations like Colombia are watching closely, hoping that U.S. pressure helps curb the flow of drugs and weapons across their borders. Every government in the region knows that if Venezuela implodes, the ripple effects will be massive and impossible to contain, too. With American warships parked at Venezuela's doorstep, the range of scenarios grows by the day. One path is deterrence, a months-long deployment meant to apply constant psychological pressure. Every day the flotilla lingers, Maduro's allies worry more about defections, coups, or betrayal inside their own ranks. Another scenario is surgical interdiction. That would mean U.S. ships, drones, and planes targeting traffickers at sea, seizing shipments and shutting down smuggling lanes. It would be aggressive, but still fall short of open war. And then there is the escalation path, the one that keeps generals awake at night. Precision missile strikes could hit cartel compounds, radar stations, or military depots. And while boots on the ground remain unlikely, they are not impossible. Inside the Pentagon, planners are running constant simulations. How would Maduro's air defenses respond? Could his militias resist a landing? What would happen if China or another outside power tried to intervene? For now, American officials maintain that the mission is strictly counter-narcotics, but everyone watching knows how quickly it could morph into regime change. In Caracas, Maduro rallies supporters, warning of an imperialist invasion. He orders militia mobilizations, parades troops, and vows to fight to the last man. Yet his actions betray desperation. Drone bans, frantic speeches, and last-minute appeals to China all signal fear, not confidence. On paper, Maduro boasts millions of militia. In reality, Venezuela's military is outmatched in every metric. The Air Force is limited and outdated. The Navy is barely seaworthy. Missile defense is patchy at best. Against Arleigh Burke destroyers armed with Tomahawks and Aegis radar, Venezuela's chances are close to zero. But numbers alone don't tell the story. The real crisis is human. Millions of Venezuelans have already fled in recent years, desperate for food, medicine, and safety. Those left behind endure crushing shortages, runaway inflation, and escalating violence. For them, America's warships offshore could represent hope or danger. Exiles like Jorge Galizia say many citizens are quietly optimistic. But in Caracas, optimism comes with risk. Speaking too openly can invite brutal retaliation. The region braces for fallout. Colombia, Brazil, and Venezuela's other neighbors know drug wars do not respect borders. If Venezuela burns, the smoke spreads fast. Washington understands this, which is why it frames the mission not only as anti-cartel, but as protecting the entire hemisphere. Still, every move carries risk. What if a U.S. patrol boards a ship and Venezuelan forces resist? What if a missile is fired at an American destroyer? Would Washington retaliate with overwhelming force? The stakes are enormous. One miscalculation could ignite the region. For Trump, the calculus is as political as it is military. Cracking down on cartels resonates with voters weary of drug violence, and it sends a message to allies and rivals alike. America is still willing to project raw power, but gambles cut both ways. If Maduro digs in, or if China decides to test Washington's resolve, the crisis could spiral out of control. So now the world waits. Warships patrol, spy planes circle, militias drill in dusty fields. But the spark has not yet lit, and when it does, the consequences will spread far beyond Venezuela. Every day of this standoff raises the pressure. Maduro speaks defiantly. Trump remains silent but decisive. And the American fleet moves ever closer, its presence impossible to ignore. For Washington, the mission is clear: crush the cartels, strangle the regime, and prove once again that America's reach has no rival. But for Venezuela, the countdown has already begun. Each passing hour draws U.S. firepower closer to its shores. The question is no longer if, it is when. The ships are already in motion. Their destination is no secret. Every mile south closes the gap between American power and Maduro's fragile rule. Satellite images confirm their movement. Open-source trackers follow the Arleigh Burkes cutting across the Atlantic. For Venezuela, the clock is ticking. Analysts see three main outcomes. The first is intimidation. The U.S. parks its fleet offshore, suffocates smuggling lanes, and dares Maduro to test them. The regime weakens internally. Allies abandon him, and collapse comes from within. The second is limited strikes. Tomahawks slamming into cartel compounds, runways, and command posts. Maduro's military reels, and Washington escalates pressure without launching a full invasion. The third outcome is regime change. Boots on Venezuelan soil, a direct operation to topple Maduro's rule. It is high risk, but not off the table. Each option carries dangers. An accidental clash could spark wider war. A prolonged blockade could deepen Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. And a full-scale strike could destabilize the entire region. Yet Washington seems convinced that inaction would be worse. For decades, cartels used Venezuela as their lifeline. Now, that lifeline has a target painted on it. Maduro's last hope lies in foreign intervention. He waves Chinese phones at rallies, invokes sovereignty in speeches, and prays for backup. But the world sees the truth. Venezuela is isolated. Russia is distracted. China is cautious. Neighbors are fed up. Even inside Caracas, whispers spread. What if generals defect? What if militias melt away? What if Maduro himself flees? The United States does not need to invade tomorrow. The pressure alone is corrosive. Each day, Maduro's options shrink further. Banks close their doors. Allies hesitate. Sanctions tighten. And offshore, America's warships remind everyone that force remains just one order away. So both sides wait. America, patient but ready. Venezuela, defiant but fragile. One wrong move, one misread signal, and the Caribbean could ignite. For now, the U.S. has not fired a single shot. It has not landed a single Marine on Venezuelan soil. And yet, its message is unmistakable. The era of tolerating Maduro's narco-state is over. The world's most powerful military is now at his doorstep, daring him to blink. And whether the end comes through collapse, coup, or cruise missile, one truth is already clear. America has spoken. So what happens next? Does Washington escalate from intimidation to strikes? Does Maduro's regime crumble under pressure? Or does the world witness the first U.S. intervention in South America in decades? No one can say with certainty, but everyone agrees on one thing. The showdown has already begun. For the Venezuelan people, this is a moment of dread and fragile hope. For Maduro, it is a countdown to survival or exile. And for Washington, it is proof that when America says enough, the world listens. The Caribbean is now an arena. The players are set. The clock is ticking. And somewhere beyond the horizon, steel warships glide silently toward their mark. When they arrive, the world will know whether this was just pressure or the opening act of something far more dangerous. Because one thing is certain, the United States has delivered its warning. Message delivered. But the question remains, will Maduro surrender to pressure, or will he force America's hand? History is watching. The hemisphere is waiting. And the countdown has already begun.